I hope that you enjoyed your lunch. And we are now ready to begin with our breakout sessions or parallel sessions. One of them take place in here and one in the room next door called Norway. This one is called Building Relevance in Society. And I will give the word and the stage to a man who works with identification and prevention of problematic gambling in high-risk sectors. He is CEO and of Epic Risk Management. His name is Paul Bach, and today he will talk about how operator sponsorship can have a positive effect on society, and he will present a project Epic has undertaken in Belgium. Welcome, Paul.
First job done. Good afternoon, everybody. I think this is our third time at the Kindred Sustainability Conference, and I think it's one of the best ones. We do a lot around different parts of the world, but this feels like one where people really come to and collaborate with. So delighted to be here. Okay, so we're going to talk about positive programs in a critical world, and I'm going to cover quite a lot in 30 minutes, so I'm going to keep it quite fast moving. So we're going to look at the current state of play. We're going to tell you a little bit about Epic Risk Management, what it is we do, where did it come from, who do we work with, and importantly, why. We're going to look at a couple of positive programs that we've done, majoring on sport, so one with the EFL and one with UEFA, Kindred, and the Pro League, and the positive effects and building relevance of such programs, and then we're going to conclude. So I'm going to whistle through quite quickly. Okay, we're in quite a tipping point, I think, and I'll come back to this later, but just looking at the UK, and apologies for using UK statistics, we know there's 450,000 problem gamblers in the UK. There's probably a further 4.5 million people directly affected. That comes from Gordon Moody research that says for every problem gambler, there'll be 10 further people involved. I think the realism is it's probably much higher than that in both of those. You know, I had a gambling addiction of my own, which I'll talk about very briefly in a second. It usually affects more than 10 people. There's also some real stats that are coming out. You know, we could have lists and lists of these. There's a very critical environment at the moment in terms of press, in terms of regulators, in terms of even politicians. And some of the stats that come out at the moment, 500,000 kids gambling every week, 55,000 of them problem gamblers. Gambling's got the highest suicide rate of any addiction. 1 in 5 people gamble on smartphones at work. Gambling now accounts for 12.5% of frauds, equating to 225 million a year. That's just in the UK. And there's been now just over 950 gambling-related crimes that have led to a custodial sentence in some way. Relevant to me because I'm one of those 950. So 7 years ago, I was in prison in England. I'd had a gambling career of over a decade. I'd transacted £4.8 million across 93 separate betting accounts. I'd lost 1.3 million, of which half of it was the banks that I owned for. So I'm not going to go into it too much today, but that's where Epic came from. And it was when I was sat in a prison in the north of England that this became very apparent to me, that in the UK, and I think it's pretty much the same across Europe and across the world, that to actually get any help with problem gambling, you have to have really fallen off the edge of a cliff. You know, if you fall off the edge of a cliff with this, you're usually in one of 4 places. You've usually bankrupt, you usually got a relationship breakdown, you've usually got a prison sentence, or you've had a suicidal thought. And my thought was, well, hang on a minute, oh, I'm going too far. Why are we waiting until people fall off a cliff before something is proactively done? And that is where Epic came from, being education, prevention, identification, control. There's some fantastic treatment providers, and since a lot of the treatment providers also do education, there's break even in the room as well. But there's not enough people trying to stop things getting to the edge of the cliff in the first place. And that was very much where Epic came from. And it was basically, where do we go and work? And we didn't know if anyone wanted to work with us or me at the time. But we thought, well, no, we'll go where most harm statistically and evidentially would exist. And this is who the people are we currently work with at the moment. Okay, so what you've got on there is some of the sectors where the most harm exists. So you've got financial services, so we do a lot of stuff with Barclays and so on. And actually, if you look at the evidence, by far the most prolific sector for gambling-related harm would be the financial services industry. Not everybody in that industry, but your risk takers, your financial advisors like I was, your stock market traders, etc. So we do quite a lot of stuff with Barclays. We do a lot of stuff with schools. So we'll see 30,000 kids directly with schools at the moment. So in terms of national curriculums, you see a lot of things around stranger danger. You see a lot of stuff around bullying, sex, drugs, alcohol. There's nothing out there around gambling at the moment. And really, what we need to be doing is remembering that most people can gamble and treat it as an entertainment product. Most people can gamble and stay in control of time, money, and cognition. But that's because you've had a lot of education about it. With gambling, I think it's the one thing that as a youngster that it's often forgotten. And actually, by going in and talking to kids about it and what the dangers could be, then it really gives them that opportunity to go and have a pleasurable relationship with gambling when they reach the age of adulthood. So we do with schools directly. We've worked with 3,500 members of the British Armed Forces. We've worked with 6 of the toughest prisons. And we've worked with professional sport. And we're going to concentrate on 2 programs in professional sport over the next 25 minutes or so. The other one is the gambling industry. So we talk about the relevance of gambling industry. When I was putting this business plan together for Epic, gambling industry weren't on the sectors we wanted to work with. It wasn't a moral thing. It wasn't anything like that. I just never thought about it. I thought, no, gambling operators won't want to. Surely their aim is just to rinse as much money out of every customer as they possibly can. And then I went to the UK Gambling Commission in 2017, explained what we were doing, and they said, why are you not working where most harm exists? And literally, I stood there and didn't know what they meant. I thought they meant kids. I thought they meant sport. But no, they meant the gambling industry. And at that point, I thought, right, we'll show them. We'll show we can go and make things more relevant. We can go and help them with the affordability, with the customer interactions, etc. And I Googled responsible gambling. Who's the best at it? Because we only wanted to work with the best. And the name that kept coming up was Maris Bonello, Kindred Group. So I got in touch with Maris, and ever since we've worked with Kindred. We also work with some others. There's some other lists on there. We work quite heavily with GVC. We work with Skybet, as we'll talk about in a moment. Jackpot Joy, Rocket X. We will only work with people who want to do it for the right reasons. There's a lot of names on there that aren't there who've approached us, but this is about doing it for the right reasons, not a tick box exercise or anything like that. In terms of sport, you can see we've sort of walked sort of across the board. I don't think there's anything new phenomenon that gambling and sport have a relationship, and that professional sports people could be at risk of problematic gambling. They're very competitive. They don't like to lose. They've got money, generally. They've got time on their hands, so hence there's often a relationship there. And we'll talk about that in the two programs I'm going to go through now. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is we're doing a program with Skybet and the English Football League, so all 72 clubs for the next 5 years as a gambling awareness program. It's probably the biggest ever done in world sport to date. Last year we saw 71 out of 72 clubs, so this is first teams and also management teams and coaching teams, and we also did club staff sessions, and you'll hear some stuff that's happening with clubs in the session that's after this one. So we visited 71 out of 72. And what we did is we decided to go in and do it as a case of telling a personal story, going through Epic's proprietary gambling spectrum, and basically help footballers for the first time study their relationship with gambling. Footballers being probably the highest risk of all the sports, I would have thought. He's not here today, but Scott is an ex-footballer. He's going to tell you a little bit about his story now, just for 3 or 4 minutes, but it'll give you a flavour of what we go in and tell the clubs as we're there.
My gambling career took its toll on my footballing career massively. I got released from Reading in 2011. I started off playing that season in the Championship. Brendan Rodgers pulled me in one day and he said to me, with your ability, son, you can play in any league in the world you wanted to, if you apply yourself properly. And I remember ringing my dad when I got out of training, excited. I was really pumped by listening to that. And it gave me the confidence to sort of go and play and express myself even more. The problem I found is that he pulled me in a few days later and asked me to be more professional, be at the training ground a little bit longer. And I couldn't do that at the time. And I never played another match for Reading after that. This was a special moment for me. Like you see the likes of Deco, John Terry, Ashley Cole. It all seems like a blur now looking back at it. Scoring a free kick against Peter Cech. It's one of those moments no one can ever take away from me. Sometimes I know it sounds sad, but I do watch it back. But that was just a small taste of what I thought was of what was to come. But a month later, I was sort of out of the team. Listen, that's the highs and lows of football. I was quite fortunate enough to play with some good players. This was one of them that I trained with every day. And for me, he was like the model pro in terms of the way that he sort of carried himself around the training ground. I moved to Crawley Town where the wages were really good. I gambled away £30,000 of my deposit for my house at the time, and that was difficult to tell my parents about. I remember looking around the property at the time, choosing what white goods I wanted to go and get, what kind of carpet I'd have, and then I had to cough up that I didn't have the money at the end of the day because I'd gambled it, I'd wasted it in a matter of weeks. I crashed my car while I was driving, watching a horse race, putting other people's lives in danger. There was nights where I couldn't get back from training because I didn't have money in my tank, and I slept in my car at the stadium after a night match. There was a disappointment when I was playing for Wycombe as well. The most I'd ever lost in a day was £7,000 as a result of getting a phone call from Leeds United showing their interest in taking me on loan. It was between me and Adam Clayton that was on loan from Manchester City to Carlisle at the time, and it came up on Sky Sports the following day that he'd signed for Leeds United, and I was absolutely gutted. I jumped in my car, went to my safe place, which was the bookies at the time, and lost £7,000 in a matter of an hour or two. Before I knew it, my professional status was gone, and I'd signed for Dunstable Town. And whilst playing for Dunstable, that's where I saw my mother in the bookies, in complete heartache, to be honest. And I knew from that day, it was June 8th, 2015, that I needed to do something about it. I've said it time and time again, the most important relationship that I had to sort of rebuild when I was going through my gambling was one with my mum. It affected her massively. Her mental health and her well-being was probably as bad as mine at the time. And I had to rebuild that trust, like I said, and a month or so after I came out of rehab, she said, I finally feel like I've got my son back for the first time in 10 years. I was completely broken. I didn't have anything left in my life. I'd lost sort of maybe £250,000. I'd lost my career, and I felt like I was losing my family as well at the time. And it was a difficult moment that I had to get through, and I had to be strong enough to come out the other side. And without her help, I wouldn't have been able to do it. If you have got a problem, all right, or if you do believe there is a problem that might be mounting, speak about it, all right? No one ever, like I said earlier, spoke to me about the problem. I didn't realise that there was this awareness, this education that we're doing now. I didn't have any of that. I didn't ever have someone come and stand in front of me and talk to me about gambling, all right? I was quite sceptical at first about going back and talking to some of the clubs where I've got not old managers but old teammates as well. I did break some of the rules when I was betting, when I was playing with some of these players, and I was a little bit scared of being judged. But they come up to me after and they just said, wow, like, I didn't realise what you were going through at the time. Like, I wish I would have known. But like you say, if we do tell players about maybe seeing a teammate that's showing a sign of weakness towards gambling, you can go and ask them. Go and ask them if they're okay. No one ever asked me if I was okay, but they knew I liked to bet. And it's one of those things, we're just trying to get them to talk openly, a bit more honestly about how they're feeling and what they're going through. But the feedback, we've not had one sort of negative piece of information so far from any of the clubs we've been to, so long may it continue.
Okay, so that's a flavour of what we kind of go around and talk about. It has to be hard-hitting. They're pretty typical audience, footballers, as other sports people, as our prisoners, as our army people, I guess. So they have to be hard-hitting. You have to get them to explain, really explore their relationship with gambling for it to be effective. A few stats here. It looks like we've got some formatting issues, but what we saw there, we saw nearly 1,400 players. A third said they would gamble less after attending an Epic awareness session. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't think problem gambling is necessarily a financial thing. It's about what you can afford. It's also your mental side of it as well. But 20% of players had lied to people important about them about gambling. 18% of players have been criticised by their friends for their gambling habits. And nearly a quarter of players have felt guilty when gambling. So the fact that they would tell us that shows them that they're starting to explore that relationship for the first time. One of the key stats was we did some anonymous handheld audience responses, and footballers were 9 times more likely to be problem gamblers than the general population in the UK. About 7.2% of the EFL came out as statistically problem gamblers. So it was quite a big stat that came out. What the players said, so you know, it was quite interesting because I said they can be quite a hard audience. The first gambling education like that I've ever seen, I'm 32. I wish I'd seen that 15 years ago. So again, it probably just shows you, this is from a guy called Charlie Mulgrew, you might know him. I wish I'd seen that 15 years ago, and again, hopefully we get to these players early enough so they're making informed decisions about gambling as they go through. Unbelievable that, mate. I had absolutely no idea. You've opened my eyes. I'm so sorry. That was a guy called Alan Judge, Republic of Ireland International. He was a teammate of Scotty when he was at Republic of Ireland, and he had no idea why Scott was staying in and not taking part in all the sort of country activities and stuff when they were called up. And then the last one we're probably the most proud of, that was brilliant, lads. Best I've seen in 30 years of football. Now, for those of you who know Roy Keane, he doesn't give compliments out very easily. So to get that one from him last year was probably quite cool. We then took that to an extra level just recently, and we've actually got 3 clubs left to do. I was contacted by Timo and by Maris and sort of said, look, we want to do something in the Belgian Football League, but we want to do something slightly different. We want the education thing around problem gambling, but we also want to send someone from UEFA and the Pro League round with you, and let's link it with betting integrity. Let's link it with match fixing and the two together. They've always been dealt with as quite separately, but actually, if you speak to players, over 75% think that if they were a problem gambler, they're more likely to influence results in the wrong way. So that's probably quite a big thing. It's probably quite a big relationship. So we've been going round to the Club Bruges of the world, the Anderlechts, there's me and Vinny Company, etc. We've been going round for the last sort of 2 or 3 months, educating the Belgian players about both. Having UEFA there along with Epic sort of has been quite a strong combination, I think. And again, the feedback we've got from the players has been very encouraging. Okay. Interestingly, though, when we talk about relevance, obviously footballers are a hard to reach occupation. So are armed forces, so are schools, etc. But when we talk about relevance in the community, some things came up in the programs that we've done, but surprised us, I suppose, to a degree, but just shows how operators can be relevant with good programs. So when we started doing the EFL, and it's happened with Belgium again since, is that players started to tweet about it. We didn't ask them to, but they started putting on social media, fantastic session today seen from the Epic lads, etc., etc. And we counted it up. We did an exercise. We counted up how many followers these guys have got, and it added up to over 13.5 million followers. Now, if you think who followers of footballers are, all right, it could be adoring girls or boys, but often it's 18 to 34-year-old blokes who like football. That's why they're following them. And we had players from the Championship, we had Jody Morris, we had Frank Lampard, we had people like that tweeting about how good it was. So if that message is reaching 13.5 million people from someone who these guys adore, then it's far more likely to be listened to than any other way. So I think that was one of our biggest stats. 2.1 million people saw the BBC One Football Focus programme that covered on us. It's a big topic. And often all the media coverage is about, let's have a go at the gambling operators, let's have a go at this, that, and the other. But actually, what about the positive aspects? Anyone who saw the Football Focus clip, or the article, it was 8 minutes. It was the longest segment they'd ever done on Football Focus in the history of the game on BBC One. And that was having the likes of Jack Ross at Sunderland, the manager, and a few players talking about it, saying, look, gambling education is so important. We need to make sure our players get it, but we also need to make sure that players get it, that kids get it at school and stuff like that as well. So again, a really positive, wider benefit of the programme. Next year, we're going to be doing 144 school education sessions where players will come along to that. So again, if you go into a school, we're going to go into the most underprivileged schools, if you like, those who perhaps wouldn't be the best listeners. But if you've got your football idols in the room with you and they're saying it's okay to talk about gambling, it's okay to talk about that kind of thing, then it's going to be a very strong message. We had 82 media appearances on TV or radio. 54 clubs held staff sessions, which included medical staff and cleaners, etc. Derby County, who you're going to hear from in a minute, they got 83 staff in, I think, on the day to come and listen to the story. So again, this is about a collaborative, positive message and getting that out there. Okay. A little bit ahead of schedule, I think, so maybe we have time for a question or we can get ahead of the thing. But I think in conclusion, we've got a little bit of a ticking time bomb. We're at a little bit of a tipping point, shall we say, when it comes to problem gambling and relevance. Betting integrity is more and more in the eyes. The Welsh national coach got sent home from the World Cup. 2 more football managers or coaches in the last week have been found flouting rules. So I think that's becoming bigger. There's a big normalisation of sport. Sport sponsorship is rising. Depending which stats you look at, it's got a higher suicide rate of any addiction. There's regulatory fines and regulatory scrutiny. There's more and more people going to prison. There's more and more kids gambling and becoming problem gamblers. And more sports are being involved with betting operators. I know Rocket X have just signed someone with Premiership Rugby who we work with very closely as well. So in theory, you could say, oh, God, there's some negative press there. But I think actually this is where the opportunity is for the gambling industry. I think if we can find programs which are effective use of RET contributions, but also effective and collaborative between operators, but also between operators and other agencies, I think it's a big opportunity. There's a picture there that 32 Red are doing at my club, Preston North End there, that, you know, underneath the 32 Red, never chase losses. Now, being a Preston fan, I'm used to losses, I can assure you. But you know, these are really positive things that people see. That was just the other night on Wednesday night when he was coming off, and that was a TV still. So it's about getting positive use and tone of sponsorship to highlight the messages. I keep getting told that gambling operators sponsoring sport is a negative thing. I keep getting told that. I keep getting told to argue it on media and so on. I don't believe that it is, as long as it's done responsibly, as long as the tone is correct, as long as it's proper messaging. It's not. If you look at the bottom there, that was a still from Wednesday night when Preston had just scored the 5th goal. If you look in the background, it's 32 Red. It's not saying sign up for a free offer or anything like that. It's saying keep gambling fun. So these messages subliminally that were always there that could have caused damage in the past, the likes of Sky Bet, the likes of 32 Red, the likes of Kindred, the likes of others, these responsible messaging around the advertising hoardings and in stadiums and in programs and stuff, they will have the same subliminal positive effects as you could argue that maybe the free bet offers, etc., could have had in the past in a negative way. Also things like the shirt messaging. You know, I know from the guys here, I know the guys from Sky Bet, it's going to be all RG pretty much going forward in terms of these messaging. I think that's important for kids and so on as well. So I think the conclusion for me is that I'm not an advocate that gambling operator sponsorship is a negative thing. You know, maybe I'm in the minority of people who've had gambling problems in the past, I'm not sure. But we work with it pretty closely at the coalface. We work with athletes and army people and everyone directly. And I think for me, the message is that gambling operators can be very relevant in society, as long as the tone of the program, the quality of the program, and the connections in the program are the right things and the right people. Thank you. Good. A little bit ahead.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Yes, and we have a microphone on its way.
Thank you. You have programs for kids and for ex-players, but a couple of weeks ago here in Denmark we had the story about, let's call him little Lasse. Lasse is now 21. Lasse lost £50,000 on gambling, and now he's been cured and all that is good. But how did Lasse get started? Well, he borrowed his father's betting app. Do you have any programs for parents? And do you think that we, as operators or as an industry, could benefit from educating parents?
Yeah. I think it's a really, really, really good point, because everyone keeps saying we're the first tech-savvy generation who are coming up now with kids. So my kids are great on iPads and everything else like that. Actually, the first tech-savvy generation were the parents of the kids now. And they've not had any education in schools or any education around that either. And actually, so you're asking parents to have conversations, or you're asking teachers to have conversations with these kids. They've not got the tools to do it. And actually, if you have the wrong conversation with kids, you could increase the vulnerability rather than reduce it. So I do think this needs to be happening. I mean, as far as Epic's concerned, we've grown from me going around telling my story to 16 people. We're about to go to 20. We're about to go to America and deal in all different things there. But we ain't going to change the world on our own. You know, there needs to be a real collaborative approach between regulators, between governments, between service providers, departments of education, and so on. So I agree with you. You know, there needs to be a real overhaul, and there needs to be good partnerships with people like there is in this room as well. In terms of parent education things, yeah, absolutely. But we're sticking to our 6 highest risk, hard to reach sectors. So I think, you know, it's something that we work with the government about. It's something that we really urge. But there needs to be found a way in a program where there's like a public health side of it maybe, or a public health campaign like there would be with bullying or drugs or alcohol or anything like that. And I can see that's the only way it's going to do it. Unfortunately, how else would you do it? It needs to be something which is more widespread.
Thank you.
Other questions? No? Then I wait. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
The next 30 minutes will focus on men and men's mental health and how to tackle the challenge of mental health through sports. To introduce this session, I would like the UK General Manager in Kindred Group, Neil Banbury, to enter the stage. Welcome, Neil. And welcome to the Lukes and Sharon, I know you brought with you too.
Yeah, hi everyone, good afternoon. My name's Neil Banbury, the General Manager for Kindred's business in the UK. And my role as part of this session is going to be very brief and just to introduce the speakers that we've got today. I think hopefully some really interesting content coming your way. The title of the conference is around building relevance, and we're going to hear about a very relevant topic and some new and insightful data that's available to us now. And then also I think it was really inspiring earlier to hear marketing talked about as having the power to change culture. And I think certainly when you look at sponsorship, more than what we do, more than what the industry does, but more broadly, we see a really positive evolution, I think, away from sponsorship just being a marketing exercise to sponsorship being an opportunity for partnership. And so I think when you look at sponsorship through that lens, you get to work together to achieve common goals. And so we're going to hear from a football club, Derby County, about one of the ways that they use their power as a sporting institution within that community to tackle a very big challenge. And so we'll sort of start with what the relevant topic is and then go on to hear how sport can help address that topic. So I'll introduce Luke, who's going to take us through the mental health issue.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having us here today to talk about this work, and particularly thanks as well for making us feel so at home by bringing the British weather along as well. But I should say, as someone who is involved in and works in UK politics, the opportunity not to be talking about Brexit is something that I very much welcome on a personal level, although given the noises coming out of Brussels today, it sounds like this might be the last of these European talks I'm allowed to come out and do for quite some time. So I'll try and make the most of it. Just to give you a bit of background on who we are and why we're talking to you today, I'm a director at Public First, and we're quite a unique organisation in that we're something of a hybrid between a think tank, a policy consultancy, and also a campaigning organisation as well. And our strong belief is that when it comes to firms influencing government and influencing policy and making change, the days when it was all about the kind of backroom deals with politicians, you know, grabbing the cup of coffee or the cigarette with the minister are over. Actually, the way that you change policy now is by engaging public opinion and by the private sector taking into its own hands the ability to shape and make policy. Right across the world, we see that, you know, politics is quite paralyzed at the moment, and where the real difference is being made is by firms who are actually engaging and saying, okay, what is the type of society we want to be in? What solutions do we have? And it's why we've been so pleased to partner with Kindred on this particular project looking at men's mental health. So what does previous research tell us about men's mental health? Well, the first thing to say is that there are some very major differences in the ways in which men and women experience mental health issues. So women are far more likely to come forward, particularly to medical practitioners, with depression and symptoms of depression than men. But when it comes to the severity of the conditions, men are disproportionately affected. So suicide rates amongst men are much higher. Alcoholism is also much higher, as is violence as well. And you end up with what is essentially a vicious cycle here, where men not only tend to experience more severe mental health problems, but they're also much less likely to seek help for those problems as well. So what we looked at was, why is it that men don't engage with mental health services? What are their perceptions of mental health services? And the big problem that comes out of existing research is the stigma associated with using those services. I think one of the really welcome developments of the past decade is that right across the world, we're having a much more positive conversation around mental health. I think governments have recognized it's an issue. I think most responsible corporates have recognized it's an issue. But the community that we're really struggling to reach at the moment is men, and in particular, working class men at that. And even then, even for those men that choose to seek help for mental health related problems, they're much less likely to secure successful treatment than women. So there's a very real problem that we were looking at and trying to address. So, why then do we need more research? Well, it's because of that problem. We haven't yet found the silver bullet to supporting men, and in particular, working class men who have mental health issues and problems. People talk about the climate emergency. I would say that, we have a mental health emergency. In the UK, suicide is the biggest killer of men under the age of 35. And actually, there's a real opportunity for organisations to play their part in supporting this mission. We know, and I'll come on to what the research shows, that the power of football to reach out to these groups, to really engage with men, not through some separate, in a separate kind of alien medical environment, but engaging on their own terms. So that's why we undertook this research project, and we polled 4,000 people across England and the UK to discover attitudes to mental health and what the links were. And I'm just going to take you through some of those findings now. So the top line figure, I think in of itself is quite interesting there, that 40% of UK adults indicated they had suffered symptoms of mental ill health in the past 12 months. To put that in context, between 5 and 20% of the population report suffering from flu each year. So this is something which is, really quite widespread. And 27% said that they had been diagnosed with a mental health issue. But this is where some of the very real differences start to come in. So firstly, you can see on there that women were much more likely to report mental health issues than men, in line with existing research. And the way that we categorized these issues was by using something called the CSD-10, which is essentially a checklist of 10 symptoms that can be attributed to depression. So things like, I felt lonely in the past week, or I found it a struggle to stay focused. And it's judged on a 3-point scale, where a score of 10 indicates depression. So there's a difference between men and women. There's also the difference in terms of class. So ABC1, broadly upper and middle class scores on that scale were much lower than they were from people in the working class communities, the C2DE group. And then particularly interesting as well is where C2DE men sit at the intersection of that. So like men in general, they're less likely to report mental health symptoms, but like people in working class communities, they're more likely to experience them and report them. So they come out somewhere in the middle. But where I think this research undercovers the problem which we have to try and solve is that lack of awareness of what might constitute symptoms of depression. So among working class men, a third of the people that we polled weren't aware of the symptoms of depression. 34 ticked none of the above on depression symptoms. But what was interesting, of that group of working class men who ticked that they had no symptoms of depression, when we dug into it, a quarter of them were suffering had a score of above 10 on the CSD scale. So they were suffering from what a clinician would say was depression, but they weren't reporting themselves as having depression. And that figure amongst the general population drops down to about 15%. So you've got a real problem there where working class men are clearly suffering from depression, but they're not acknowledging it. And then as you go on, we find that among working class men, those that do have symptoms, those that do report it, are particularly likely to be affected in their work and social life as a result. So half of working class men who experienced symptoms of depression said that it had an impact on their work. A third said that it had an impact on their social life, so they stopped socializing, they avoided seeing friends as a result. And again, in the general population, those figures are actually much lower. So we've got the kind of double storm of working class men being both less likely to know or to report that they have mental health issues, but where they have them, where they've crossed those thresholds, it's having a much more severe impact on their day-to-day life. And I don't need to tell you that that has real costs for society. You know, there's the cold, hard economic cost of that. You know, the estimate's up to 100 billion a year in terms of costs to our domestic economy. Reductions of life expectancy. We know that mental ill health problems amongst prisoners are much higher than among the population ill. The social cost in terms of violence. It's not something that we can just let continue and continue to ignore. So how do we reach it? It's very clear that traditional approaches just aren't working. And that's why we decided to look specifically at what role sport might have as the gateway into tackling issues with mental ill health amongst working class men. And this is, you know, it's really interesting that 61% of working class men identify as fans of sport. Of those, 85% pick football as being particularly important to them. And it's not just that they follow sport, it's that it's a really important part of their local community. It's something that they tell us they talk to family and friends about on a regular basis. They see the local football club as a source of pride in their communities. They follow teams on a regular basis. They track, you know, how well different their team is doing relative to other teams. And what's really important is that those who say sport is an important part of their life, 80% of them say that the local football club is a key pillar of the community. So what I think we've found here is that the way in, the route towards tackling mental ill health may come to be around meeting men on their own terms rather than trying to do something separate, which is why we think that the Team Talk project, which is obviously supported by 32 Red, is so important. You'll hear more from the team about that project shortly, and I don't want to steal any of their thunder, but just to say, you know, from our perspective, the academic and polling perspective, we think those initial results are really very encouraging, and we may finally have cracked the secret to tackling mental ill health amongst a particular group of men. So just in conclusion, we know there's a problem with mental ill health amongst working class men. They're less aware of the symptoms, less likely to seek help, and more likely to suffer severely as a result of those problems. But the way in could be through the use of sport. You know, it's clear that they place a real importance of sport in their day-to-day lives, and projects such as Team Talk show real signs of progress and the ability to do so, which is why I'm delighted to hand over to the team from Derby now.
Hiya. So I'm Sharon Dale. I'm the Health Manager for Derby County Community Trust. This is Luke Wilkinson, who's the Health Team Leader for Derby County Community Trust. And we're just going to give you a whistle-top tour of Team Talk and sort of how it progressed in the city. So around 18 months ago, a dedicated volunteer of ours came to us and asked us if we would support him to develop a mental health program for men. And the idea was the fact that there was no program in the city that supported men with mental health issues, that they could have a safe space. So we developed the pilot project, and we were lucky enough in May last year to secure some funding through Kindred to actually develop the project more from 1 hub to 5 hubs across the city by June 2020. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of his story because it's much more interesting than me standing up talking, and then I'll hand over to Luke in terms of what we actually did.
Around 5 years ago, I suffered with depression, and I didn't really know how to deal with it at the time. It was more to the point of, because I was always working on sites, I was seen as this Jack the lad, love to have a laugh kind of lad, so I hid it quite well. And I just used to go out at weekends, probably Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and just used to hide behind this exterior that wasn't really me. And it was only up until, I'd probably say 3 years ago, when I finally went to the doctors and they said about depression. And from there on, I've just been able to cope with it and deal with it. I was reading through social media and I was watching videos, as you do on Facebook. And there was a video that I came across which stood out massively to me. So it was all about football, and it was about these supporters that had been going to the game with family members or friends, and there was an empty seat next to them, and they were talking about the experiences in the past that they've been to football games with, and then they'd got into the story about either the family member or the friend taking their own life. And after I'd watched that video, I turned to my partner and I said I'd be quite interested to see if there was anything in Derby. Couldn't find anything. So then I just said to her, would it be an idea to sort of set up a group? And with me working at Derby full time, I thought I'd try and speak to our HR to see what we could do. And HR put me in contact with the trust. And then from there on, we've set up a group.
I'm Luke Wilkinson, Derby County Community Trust Active Supporters Team Leader. Team Talk started in June 2018 after being approached by Sean Headley. This group has then gone on to progress into a weekly session that works with men in a safe place to come and talk, whether it be about work, life, or just things in general. It's a safe place. We play FIFA, pool, we do cards, we chat, we have a cup of tea and biscuits, we're all around, just have a good laugh. Team Talk has shown that not only are we now a band of brothers, it's also given them ideas to go away in their own time and work on things that they wanted to work on. It's shown progression. One gentleman has now stopped counselling, he now comes to us instead, which is massive for him. And also it's given people confidence to talk about it on Facebook to friends, family, colleagues, that obviously mental health isn't something to be ashamed about, it's something to be proud of, that they're coming out to make a change.
It's given me a new lease of life, to be quite honest with you. So obviously I've struggled in the past. I also use it as a bit of a release as well, so I can go into the room and I can chat and I can tell my experiences and talk about things, which I'm quite open about doing now anyway. But also, it gives me something to do. So on a Monday, I look forward to it every single week. So at the weekend, I'll start to get a bit more excited about Monday coming round, whereas normally Monday was this dull day. Whereas now there's something to look forward to every week.
Don't be afraid to come along. We're here to listen, we're here to help. We may not have the answers, but we're trying to guide you in the right direction. It's what you do next that counts. So now I'm just going to talk about what we do at the sessions, because that video is really inspiring, so every time I see that I smile. But it's good for you to know that we do everything from participation feedback. So when they come in, they decide what they want the room to look like. So it's a safe space. So by that we mean is we block off the whole, it's our community offices and the whole top floor, it's men only. So that then gives them the purpose to come in to go, actually, I feel comfortable and I want to talk. So we go into an open room where there's tea, biscuits. Us Brits, we love a tea and a biscuit, so we do that quite a lot. We have a giggle, there's FIFA going on, pool, cards, table tennis, and we just get them just to relax and kind of get to see how the week's been, what they've been up to, and kind of just interact with others that they won't normally interact with. The second hour, we do what we call a chatty room, and in there, there's a conversation that gets going. So I try and get that going, to get them talking. So it could be anything from anxiety to expectation, and we link that into their everyday life. So work, family, Facebook, social media, and we have a big conversation where they can either open up, they can either share, or we can kind of just have a general chat and get away from it. And I think from that as well, there was a need for physical activity. So what we do as a trust, we have lots of other physical activity programs going on. So we host football sessions for them. We've been to other football clubs to buy fixtures. We've gone to Derby County home fixtures all together as a group. So from being so individual walking through the door, they're now a big a team. So they get on. We've got a WhatsApp group. So we always interact within that WhatsApp group. How's the day been? Anyone just sharing advice? We can put inspirational quotes on and we can signpost them to other things. I think what's really key is, yes, us as a trust, we're at the front of that program, but it's all about the participants. So if they want to do something different next week, they'll tell us and we'll put that into plan. And I think that's where the retention rate comes in, and that's where the figures are so high, is because they're making that choice. We're not forcing them to do something. They're wanting to make that change. So the participants' achievements, we thought it was really key to show you what's going on. So employment, what we mean by that is in the UK, there's a lot of people being off sick with depression, anxiety. We're not saying we're changing that, but males that have come to the group, they've started to get back into their job or change their job because it was causing too much stress and going to different lines of employment. We've had one of our gentlemen start up their own business. And again, that wasn't us saying, go start your own business, give them that confidence, that new lease of life. And that's incredible. Volunteering. So yes, we run it, but we couldn't do it without the volunteers. So we've got now a pool of volunteers that are going through education, which Sharon will speak about in the next slides. But without them talking to the males, just making them a cup of tea, opening the door for them, talking to them on WhatsApp, it wouldn't happen. And positive discharge from counselling. We're not a counselling service, but we've got signposts to the relevant services within the city that we work in. But this gentleman's been going to counselling for 2 or 3 years, didn't see a way out, and now has actually gone, I don't want to go to counselling anymore, I want to come to Team Talk, I want to give something back. So for us, those are just the start, but it just shows you in the room that this is what we're trying to achieve within a simple but yet effective concept, what Team Talk is. So the new sessions, obviously Sharon spoke about the new hubs. We're working with University of Derby and Combat Stress. Now, Combat Stress, I'll touch that on first, is a veterans charity. So we do quite a lot with veterans within the city and the county. But this looks at younger veterans and their mental health. So we're starting a new hub that just works with them. Now, that's a very hard service to work with, the trust and getting them engaged, but we've been running that one for about 4 weeks now, and the figures, men coming through the door, we're at about 6 or 7, but for that area, that's quite a good number with the start, so we're really looking forward to that progressing. The University of Derby, there was something came out in local media about mental health within universities and not enough being done to tackle it. So we've linked in with our local university. We do health and wellbeing events, but now from next week, we'll be running a weekly session within the University of Team Talk to get more males engaged, to get away from studies, get them more integrate with others, because being lonely away from university for the first time or second or third years is a key issue. So coming in and just getting away from the university life, we feel that that's going to be really beneficial. So they're the new sessions coming in.
Okay, so what next? So whilst we know that the current hubs that we've got are really, really successful, it's around how do we sustain that and how do we ensure that the people that are accessing it are given the skills to be able to not only go out but also become volunteers. What we've more recently done is developed a bespoke mental health training package. Now we know there's lots of packages across England that people can go to, but we felt actually that was a step too far based on where they were coming from. So this package looks at their ability to look at themselves and then being able to support others. And how do they support others in a nurturing way, but still building the confidence of their own so they can actually come out with us. Following that, next year they'll go on to something that's called mental health first aid training, which is sort of being launched across the whole of England at the moment. What the idea there is that we will start to build a workforce, so they will begin to become volunteers to start off with, but ideally they become the face and the staff of our workforce. And the reason why we do that is because they're in a much better position than Luke and I, who have not suffered mental health problems, to be able to talk to other men, and we know that's successful just from the feedback from the hubs that we're currently running. As Luke alluded to earlier, we do pull the stats, and the stats actually speak for themselves in terms of we know this is working. So the stats that we've pulled over the last 12 months, and they're their outputs. One of the other things that we're looking at is we're just starting to develop a relationship with Rolls-Royce, which is one of the biggest industries in Derby, with around 4,500 people employed, a majority of them males. And the idea is, how do we take Team Talk into a workforce and work as an in-house service to provide the opportunity for people to access it as opposed to them coming out. And I think one of the things that Luke didn't allude to is that a lot of the people accessing the service now are a lot of sort of directors of companies, people who are sort of a really well-paid job, but we do need to start looking at how do we access those people in a more targeted intervention around people who wouldn't come to services. So that's the next steps in terms of that. So that's kind of it from Luke and I. One thing we would like to say, though, is a massive thank you to Kindred and Public First for taking a huge leap in actually funding us for the last 8 months. And without those, we definitely wouldn't have been able to run the service as it is today. So thank you.
Can you stay for a while if any questions, maybe? Any questions? Yes, over there. Oh, the microphone is on its way. We will find a new one.
There it is. Yeah, just related to that, the mental health and the guys that you're treating. Is online gambling a part of the reason that they're suffering depression sometimes? And do you have any people involved in those programs who choose to give up to help deal with their depression?
In the chatty groups, it's interesting because it's a variety of reasons why they're in depression. Gambling's a small percentage, but we're looking at speakers coming in to talk about the gamble awareness, stuff like that. But I think if it was a minor reason for their depression. It's work, money, family. So we've not really hit mass gambling depression just yet.
Other questions? We have one here.
Like that? Yeah. Thank you for the talk, very interesting. I'm just wondering, is that very common across, football clubs in the UK, or are you very particular? And if not, how can you spread in the UK that kind of initiatives?
So, within Derby, we've got quite a big health programme within Derby County Community Trust that covers quite a lot of service areas and different health initiatives. So we are more or less at the forefront of a lot of English football clubs around what we're doing. So we are the first, from what we can pick up, one to actually work with men with those particular issues. We do know that the Team Talk programme is going to be extended, so we know that Kindred are supporting 2 additional clubs. And the idea is that we would like it to go across more of the football clubs and sort of some of the businesses. So we'll start looking at that and how can we support those in terms of some of the good practice and some of the things that didn't go so well. Because it's okay standing up saying things went amazingly well, but some things didn't go so well. So it's just around that learning and being able to explain that and support other people.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Henrik, I know you're not prepared for this, but I would like to come up here for a while, if it's okay. And does this one work? Perfect. Because Henrik, I was wondering, Luke said that he is always smiling when he sees this little movie. I did too. Yeah. And I think you did.
I did.
Yeah. How do you feel about being a part of this program and these big achievements?
No, it is makes you really proud. I was almost about to applaud when that movie was finished because I think it was so good. It's really encouraging to see what can be done with the relatively small means and spread out into the community. As I said before, trying to be a net contributor to society, and everything we can do to help is of course goes good in that sense. So it's really encouraging, and thank you very much, guys, for all the hard work that you're doing. Really good.
And I was asking you earlier today if you are good enough to tell the good stories. Are you good enough to communicate about a project like this?
Absolutely. No, but it's interesting for me is to see as well, because I work on the kind of global scale of our business. I don't get to see all the different initiatives we do in the different markets either. So it's very good to see also for me in this sense what we're actually achieving.
But I know that it's very important that you tell everybody in here, but are you good enough to tell it in open in society?
Yeah, no, we should do that. And that's what we're doing with our sustainability reports and other aspects of what we're doing as a business. But of course, as I said before, we can do more, and we will as well.
Thank you, Henrik.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
Luke also. Our next visitor represents the European Football Development Network. The EFDN is a network of football clubs, leagues and FAs committed to their communities and social responsibilities. Today we have the CEO with us, Hubert Rovers, and he will present how the EFDN aims to change life through football. Welcome, Hubert.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. This is it. Good. Welcome. Well, thank you everyone for giving me the time to be here. Let me check if everything works, because I don't have the best track record when presenting and technique and stuff like that. But today it seemed all to work. So yeah, my name is Hubert Rovers. I'm one of the founders of the European Football for Development Network. And this morning we had a speaker that said, "What is wrong with your business?" I work in football. The thing that's wrong in my business is that we got 980 professional clubs in Europe. They all think they're going to win the Champions League. And they all want to win the Champions League, so they spend a lot of money to do that. And they all forgot where they come from, because most of these clubs already started 100 years ago as a community initiative. A couple of blokes that wanted to play football, kick a ball around, and that's where most of these professional clubs come from. So I started in football at a small club in the Netherlands, NAC Breda, as a community manager in 2006. And what I recognize is that although we're all competing on the field, we're not competitors off the field. And in CSR, in community and social responsibility, as we call it, there's a willingness for clubs to share what they do in community outreach programs, in stadium accessibility. And there's not a lot of difference if you organize these activities in England, in the Netherlands, or in Germany, or in Spain. About 80-85%, that famous rule, that applies here as well. So you can do all kinds of programs quite in the same way. And the limited amount of money that's available in CSR in football, there's a lot of money in football, but unfortunately not in CSR in football. We can use that to make it a program that is from Derby County, or that is from NAC Breda, or from FC Barcelona. So in 2014, we came together with 7 clubs and started the European Football for Development Network. Now in 2019, we were 75 clubs, 4 leagues, and 3 FAs, all sharing best practices and developing programs together. We work with the ECA, with FAIR, with all the big ones. And as someone already told before me, that football has a unique position in the world. I always say it's the modern church. No one goes to church anymore, but everyone goes to a football club on a Saturday. So this is the new place where you can find people, attract people that are difficult to reach for other ones, and where you can engage with them on different topics and discuss really everything that's need to. So what we try to do is, we're an NGO in the Netherlands, and we said, okay, we need to change the football industry. So we went to UEFA, ECA, and all of these big organizations and said, CSR, community outreach programs and social responsibility, that's something that you need to address. And they said, well, okay, that might be interesting, but not now. Okay, when then? No one knows. So we started ourselves as a bottom-up initiative, and we said we're going to change every football club, league, and FA in Europe and make them socially responsible. Why? Because 1, they can and they should be giving back to the community. 2, because we think if you are a responsible organization, and you give back to the community, you're responsible throughout your whole day-to-day operation. So it's about stadium access, it's about being good for your own staff, it's also being good for your academy players who will not make it, because only 0.001% will be the next Messi that makes enough money before he's 35 and then have nothing to do after that. A lot of them still have to know something, have a job after they stop with football, and need to do something in the community. So our mission is to make every club, league, and FA in Europe socially active, and we want to be the organization where people can come to. And now, 5 years later, we are working with UEFA and ECA, and they're starting to change a bit. And one of the things that we did is we identified or we talked the language of the Sustainable Development Goals, something that's really well known in corporate organizations and companies, but that was not known in football. So all of these community outreach programs, you can align them with one of the SDGs, and that's what we did. So we talked to our clubs, we invited the UN to talk about the SDGs on our conferences, and explained that what clubs are actually doing is in line with the SDGs, but to bring different languages together, a corporate language and the sport language, we thought it was good to explain that. And that's basically what we do throughout all our activities. We identify best practices and then communicate about those best practices to the clubs and to our members. So for us, CSR in football is not philanthropy. It's not something only like giving back, but especially if you're a smaller club, you're not going to win the league. You're not going to win the Champions League, but you're not going to win the league either. But you can make CSR a tool for your for building fan base, to engage with other organizations, and to build a positive image for you. So for us, in CSR and community outreach programs, with football, you can target everyone from 0 to 100 years old. We know there's community outreach programs done by clubs throughout Europe that engage with everyone in this age. Our oldest participant of one of our members is 108 years old. That comes to a weekly session. We have a woman from 95 playing walking football every week. And she says that she's chased by men again. She's 95. So we focus on a wide variety of topics, from education, from employability, and CSR is not only for the wider public, but we promote amongst our members that they should focus in the day-to-day operation, that it's everyone. So the only employees, including the guys that deliver the food on a match day, they should earn a good wage where it's possible to live from every day. the fans should be welcome inside the stadium, regardless of where they come from and how much money they make or what color they have, or how able they are. And you can engage with different target groups that makes your brand bigger, while making a good contribution to the community as well. So what we promote is that CSR is on an organizational level. It starts with good governance. To be sustainable, you have to make enough money, of course, but make your organization a financial stable one so you can continue giving back to the community. But at the same time, that giving back, make that well known across all your stakeholders, so it's in balance. So our vision is that it's a pyramid of working together. It's FAs, clubs, and leagues working together with a wide variety of organizations. On every match day, you can find the director next to a guy that's unemployed. You can find a 12-year-old next to someone of 35 years old or even older. You can find different people next to each other, and they will all jump up when their team scores. That same strength you can use to bring people together at a football club to work with. You don't have to know everything as a football club. The only thing you have to do is to show that your brand, your stadium, and your players are open for everyone, and that the people that will know what they're talking about can come to your venue and engage with people that are attracted through your venue, and then you can build something together. So that's our vision that we promote, and one of the partnerships that we do that with now is from this year is our first community partner, which is Kindred, because we have that vision that we want to create 100 more than football networks across Europe, where everyone works together in that sense, and that is what we found with Kindred as a partner, an organization that wanted to build that together with us. There's always been a link between football and betting. There's always been a link between lotteries and then sport. And why not, as a company that can give back to the community in that sense, that can build an organization, or that can help an organization like us to go outside, reach and hopefully inspire all these clubs and all these football dinosaurs that still think they're going to win the Champions League, to try to change their mind and make their club a force for good. So in that sense, in that period, with all these organizations, we're up to 85 clubs at the moment that follow these guidelines. So we're up to 50 more for next year, and that's what we intend to do. So our vision is that football should be more than football. It should be you should be able to give something back and win at the same time. If you do that, then every kid, although you don't have the best players, although you're not going to win the league or the cup in the next 30 or 40 years, and I'm with Knockbreda, I know how that is like, but it's a cool club to go to just because they do a lot more than just play the games one every 14 days at their home stadium. So as mentioned, there's a lot of different topics that you can address through community outreach programs. Oh, yeah, now I need to go back. See, me and technique. So one of the things that we did is we identified from all our member clubs, okay, from the 17 SDGs, how much do you really target them? Now, I know this is way too small for you to see, but if you are interested, just come after me and I can send it to you. But these are all the SDGs, or the goals that are addressed by our members. So in general, we focus on 4 things within EFDN. So again, like I said, about 80 to 85 of all the programs are going to be quite similar in the UK, Spain, or even Ukraine. So what we do is we share knowledge and experience through conferences, through an online platform, through research, and we create practitioners' guides about how to set up CSR strategy, and especially in Eastern and Middle Europe, where this is well, not widespread. It's a useful tool that we set up with the University of Brussels. We also have done research on how to use players as role models, because one of the research that we did in the Netherlands was if you go to, and that was among school children, if you have to believe that food is good, well, healthy food is good for you, who are you going to believe first? Your mum, your dad, your teacher, or a professional football player? You don't want to know the result. Because about 60% set the football player over their own parents. So that's the role that a football player can have on a certain age. But the problem is these guys are first and foremost football players. And you can keep, they should be a role model, and they're quite often used as a role model. But if you use a player that's only 18 or 19 years old himself, he can play the best games of his life. That doesn't mean that he can go to a classroom, talk about anti-bullying or anti-racism, and especially if he's not even in his own country. So what we did is a research amongst our member clubs and the leagues. How do you help your players to become a role model? What kind of documents do you use? How do you prepare them beforehand? Is someone helping them at the session itself? And we created a guide for that, because a player appearance is only fun if the player has fun himself as well, because otherwise it's not going to help anyone. So we do a lot of research on that. We in the 5 years of existence that we have now, we obtained about 5 million euros of European funding to deliver programs that I'm going to show you a couple of in a minute. We do a lot of staff exchanges, youth exchanges, and on these youth exchanges there's young people from different countries all around Europe that have the same dreams, that have the same problems in life, and they all love, a lot of them love the same thing, that's football. They don't speak the same language, but through football as a language you can bring them together and let them know that it doesn't, there's not a lot of difference where you live in Europe, but you all have the same dream. So we help our members also with a couple of partnership with universities, and one of the biggest thing that we do is creating visibility, because unfortunately this is still one of the best kept secrets of European football. Both our organization as well, but especially what all these clubs are doing, a lot of people don't know about it. So one of the things that we do is to promote that, and I always went through this. So now we run 16 different programs on health. We run programs in schools for 7 to 12 years old, Scoring for Health, where they learn about physical activity, where they learn about to read packages, what is in food. We have an active fans program, quite similar to the one from Derby, but then on physical health. This 35-year-old man that's not going to a gym, he will not listen to his doctor, but it's fun to have some sport activities at the football club, and that's what we did. One of the other things that we developed is the Healthy Football League, which is an online app. It uses the data from the mobile phone to use the number of steps and the calories that someone takes on a day to score points for his favorite team. It was an idea from one of the clubs. We're now testing it, and we will launch it in January. And we want to use the rivalry between fans to get people moving. So I honestly think that if in FC, if you got fans from FC Copenhagen and Brøndby, and they see that one is 1,000 steps in front of them on the league table, that people are mad enough to go out and walk their dog to get their team above the other one. So we want to use the rivalry between fans to let fans take 10,000 steps a day. They will earn a medal by that, and that was only possible because of European collaboration. So we do all these kind of programs on community outreach programs, but we also focus on stadium access, stadium sustainability, because CSR is more than just doing good in the community. So we give advice about stadium or about energy saving. We give advice about waste reduction, but also on reusable plastic cups, transportation. So again, the app that we that we developed. You score extra points if you're walking or cycling to your stadium instead of going by car. And there's one club, Forest Green Rovers now in the UK, which is completely CO2 neutral and the first vegan club in the world. So you can only get vegan food and beverage on match days. On wheelchair access, audio description for blind and narrow-sighted people. And one of the things that is most, and I didn't know about this a year ago, is colorblind awareness. We just started or received funding for a program on colorblind awareness. What I didn't know is that 1 in every 12 men is colorblind. 1 in every 200 women is colorblind, which actually means that if you're watching a football game on a green pitch, that from the 20 Premier League clubs of this year, their kit, if you're colorblind, you see only 4 different ones. The rest are all quite similar. And if you then think that broadcasting companies are paying billions and 8% of their audience can even see the game because the kids clash, that's perhaps something for them and perhaps for you on your websites to think about. And that's basically one of the greater examples we do. We identify best practices throughout our network and then make it available for everyone, because we don't have all the knowledge, and certainly the club don't have all the knowledge, and it's not that they're not willing to, but it's most of the time is that they don't know. We developed a quality label and a couple of guidelines for the clubs. What can you start with? What can you do? And again, the visibility is a great one, making everyone know what we're trying to do, and trying to replicate that as soon as possible with the most impact as possible. So I got a number of examples of programs that we are running. So this is one of the stadium on an awareness campaign for LGBT rights. This is Inter Milan doing a worldwide program to get kids playing football all over the world and forget about their issues. And this is PAOK in Greece setting up a food campaign after a disaster. And there's a lot of clubs that do this day in, day out, every week throughout Europe. So small clubs, big clubs, everyone can participate. And so one of the programs that I told you about is our walking football program, the 95-year-old woman that plays football every week. A lot of these clubs started with young people because it made more sense, because that was also where the money was. Because then when you get in touch with the young people, they can become part of your kids club and they become a member and so on. But nowadays, European society is aging, and it's aging a lot. And social isolation is one of the biggest risks now in European society. So we needed to develop something to get people active again, and we know that football can bring you new friends. If you're 6, 7 years old and you go to your Sunday league club, you get new friends. Well, that happens also when you're 60, 70, or 80 years old. If you lost your wife, if you lost your husband, playing football can create new fans. So we developed a new version of the game, and we didn't. To be honest, we didn't develop that. A club in England did in 2013, but in 2015, that walking football methodology was only well known in the Netherlands and in the UK. So what we did is we communicated that throughout Europe, and we had the first European walking football festival with clubs.
We represented 21 teams all around the continent, so this is going to be a real festival.
I got the opportunity after turning 50 to join my local over 50s club, and I went along for a trial. I loved it, absolutely loved it. My primary reason was to just go out and get fit and exercise, and through that I've not just benefited from on a health point of view, but also on a social level. I've made some new friends, and one important thing is, before I started playing over 50s walking football, I had just been told that I was diagnosed as being diabetic. And since then, and along with an improved diet, I've been able to reverse the type 2 diabetes, and now I'm below the threshold. So I'm pleased about that too.
Six years ago, I was diagnosed with PTSS. I didn't go out, only with my wife. I was very afraid for people. So I locked myself up in my room. I didn't go anywhere. And I saw this advertise from Walking Football. So my wife decided to, you have to go to football to don't sit at home. I made the step, and I'm very happy I did.
From the first minute I played, I was hooked. It was absolutely brilliant. Put your boots on again, get your kit on. But the other thing is the camaraderie, meeting up with the guys 2 or 3 times a week. It's great social-wise and whatever, and it's just great. You make a whole new bunch of friends playing walking football.
Yeah, so that's one of the examples that we do for people over 50s. You know, yeah. See, that happens to me all the time. Yeah, so that's one of the programs that we do from the over 50s, and with that there came a spin-off, because when you have people coming in from 50 and 60 years old, they have well, first the most important activity basically when we started this is to teach our member clubs how to organize these walking football sessions. And it's actually quite, well, you think it's quite simple, don't one. One of the biggest problems is that although they are 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, they all think that they're 16 again when they start going on the pitch. With guys that haven't played for 40 years. So that was one of the issues. But then after that, after the session, they also started to talk. And they started to talk about their lives. And then, so the third half, the social part became much more important than actually the physical part. And then from that, there came a spin-off that some of the members said, yeah, I got this guy, but he has Alzheimer, and he cannot come on this session, but we think that will help as well. So a lot of the clubs developed which is now called and generally used in the UK, a program like Football Memories, where you use football memorabilia to talk about the games from 70 years ago. And what you then see is that people that haven't talked or are not aware then started to talk again about what they did. So that's the power of football, and that's how some things from one program can evolve to another one. So another program that we do, and I already told you, is a program about youth exchanges. So we have a lot of kids coming from deprived areas, sometimes never on a plane before, and we can bring them to clubs like Feyenoord Rotterdam or Benfica or Hapoel Tel Aviv, or play on the beach in Cyprus, where they can meet new other kids with the same dreams. But most of all, we teach them life skills, learning to win and to lose, learning to communicate and to talk about or to present, learn different words in another language. The problem is that when you bring young people together, they always teach each other the wrong words from a language. But from that, you really build bridges through football. And there's a video that I need to skip because of time. But we do everything together. It's not, we use football as the tool, but it's a lot more than just the football. So let me see if I can skip this. Yeah. And one of the programs that was already mentioned, I think in 2 or 3 presentations before me, is the work that's done in prisons. We have our program as well, Football Works, which is an employability program where clubs from throughout Europe go inside prisons, use football as a tool for people that are just a couple of weeks or months before they go out to the community again. And through football and creating a social environment where they can go to when they go out of prison, they come into, well, not a safe, but a safer area where the risk of going back into prison and going the wrong path is already proven a lot more success with these kinds of programs. So this year we organized the first European football tournament inside the prison walls of a Dutch prison. We worked together with the Dutch Justice Department, and we had 14 teams, including clubs from England, Belgium, the Netherlands, playing football inside the prison walls. 6 of those teams were former prisoners, the teams from former prisoners. But we had 8 teams that were actually prisoners coming from different prisons inside the Netherlands, and even with guarded police, 1 team from Germany to play football in this and to promote this methodology throughout Europe, and that football actually works. So there's a couple of photos there, and then I already touched on this. So the Active Fans program, 35 years old, men and women go to their club for a 12-week session where they are physically active. They learn about healthy nutrition, how much calories are in food, in beer, in everything, and it actually helps these guys to get them active again and lose some weight, which I can relate to as good as well. So we do all these programs throughout Europe, and again, this was a program that was developed in Scotland. We identified it as a good practice that we could multiply throughout Europe, and together with European funding, we make this happen now in 10 different countries. And the Healthy Football League, I already touched on that. So what we try to do is to get every club in Europe in our online competition, to get their fans active, to make them do 10,000 steps a day, and to get their club on top of the league table. So this was it for me with a couple of examples. Thank you. Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Hubert.
You are.
And now you can ask Hubert questions if you want to. No? Thank you, Hubert.
Thank you.
Regulation is an important and often discussed part of the gambling industry, and for the next 30 minutes we will see the gambling industry from the regulator's point of view. Therefore, I would like to welcome our next 4 guests from Denmark, France, Sweden and Malta. Richard Nørgaard from the Danish regulator Spilmyndigheden, and Jannik Hassan from the Maltese regulator Malta Gaming Authority, and from the Swedish regulator Spelinspektionen we have Anna Sims, and from the French regulator Achille Clément Martin. Welcome to all of you. We need some chairs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to tell you that we want questions during this session, but Menti doesn't work at the time, so we go the old-fashioned way with the microphone. So just raise your hand if you have any questions for the regulators. Welcome to all of you.
Thanks.
Today we have heard 2 keywords, I think, among others. It's a collaboration and dialogue. And I would like to ask all of you, how do you see the collaboration and the dialogue with the gambling industry? We can begin here.
Well, in Denmark, we pride ourselves on this dialogue with the industry. And a good example of this is the Code of Conduct, which recently was an experiment by the Danish politicians where we gave the industry an opportunity to self-regulate and adhere to one standard set of rules. And it was Morten and Doga, and we would like to thank him and his hard effort on the Code of Conduct. So we'll see where that takes us, and if it's not enough, then that hard regulation is the only way to go. So that's one example of dialogue, but we try and communicate with the industry and try and get them to adhere to our rules. I find it quite interesting that 28% of you find it hard to comply with the rules. So,
but you try with the self-regulation.
We try with self-regulation at the moment on the advertising. So we do not follow the standard trend internationally at the moment, which is hard regulation. We try with the dialogue.
Oh. So why won't you follow the rest of Europe in this question?
It's not the Danish way. We try and set up some good examples for them to follow, and if they don't follow that, then we'll regulate.
Clément?
Yeah, I think the main issue. First, I want to thank for inviting us here. It's a pleasure to give the French regulator perspective. I think we have to relate all of this balance between regulation and self-regulation with the public opinion. I think for the gambling industry, it will be all the time a balance between is it a drug industry or is it an entertainment industry? And then if the public opinion consider that it's more a drug industry, then you will have more constraints and regulation and very hard rules. And if the balance is it is an entertainment industry, then the self-regulation can be very interesting. And I think as a regulator, we need to work with the operators to help them to behave, to make it like an entertainment industry. And it's not only a question of advertisement, it's also a question about how do you do with your problematic gamblers, how do you deal with the detection of pathological behaviors, and also how do you sell your products. And for instance, in France, we saw the last 4 years a lot of competition on the sports book industry. And to be competitive, the operators made a lot of marketing expenditures. And so it's becoming now an issue because we see a lot of advertisement for sports betting in France. And so the public opinion and the politicians believe that it's pretty too much. Because we see on the subway or even on TV a lot of advertisement for operators. So
and how do you react on that?
We are trying to say, okay, maybe there is too much advertisement, but the main issue is the content of the advertisement, and we need to help the industry to give a good message to the public and not being too much aggressive. We are trying to, that's why we are trying to work with the Ministry of Health about the rules we can apply in the content of the advertisement, but not about the volume. But it's pretty hard because if you listen to them, they just want to ban advertising because they believe that it's more a drug industry than an entertainment industry. So I think the industry should take that into account. And of course, it's difficult to self-regulate when you have a lot of competition because you just want to be better than your competitor. So I think you have to show courage to reduce and to be more. I think. To take into account that the image you give to the market and to the politics and to the public opinion has a lot of importance and can have an impact on the rules you will have to suffer after that.
And then Jannica from Malta, how do you see the collaboration with the gambling industry?
Thank you for the invitation, first of all. Malta always tried to take the approach of collaboration and coordination and dialogue with the industry as a foundation, because we genuinely believe that without that collaboration, then we cannot achieve the objectives of our legislation. And I think the industry today has matured enough to the point where they do not need to stick to the bare minimum of the legislation. And if they're going to stick to the bare minimum of what the legislation requires, then it's not going to be enough. And we're seeing this trend all over Europe. I mean, there's increased compliance, increased fines, and the industry has taken a hit in that respect. And it's a hit that was expected because of the way in which perhaps advertising was becoming too aggressive. The competition has increased, so it was expected in a way, but what we want to see is, so the legislation sets the objectives, and the objectives are to keep gambling fair, to keep it free from crime, and to keep it as a source of entertainment, and to prevent players from falling into the pitfalls of addiction, and if they do, to help them get back out of it. And operators shouldn't stick to what is barely written in the law and stick to the bare minimum, but should actually achieve those objectives in a variety of ways. I mean, today, the industry has grown so much that all operators have the data and the resources to do so much more than the bare minimum of what the law requires. And that's what we want to see. And we want to see operators sit around the table. The competition is there, and it's very evident, and it's very real, and we are aware of it. So we're willing to sit around the table together. And we would like to agree on the basic, perhaps, standards of who a problem gambler is and how you can help that problem gambler, even the most basic thing, which would be when to approach a player and to speak to him. In my opinion, it should be done from the very beginning, because if it's done from the very beginning, then that player will never feel that sense of patronizing approach from the operator. So if it's done from the beginning and an operator builds a relationship and not just rely on the brilliant AI tools that will and the chat bots, but actually speak to a player and establish a relationship with that player. And I think at that point, if we can all agree on when to do that, then that would be the first stepping stone. And I believe that in the end will make the industry more sustainable, because I fear that the industry is approaching a burnout in the sense of legislators are becoming annoyed, and it became very evident with the approach that some legislators have taken.
Thank you, Jannica. Anders, welcome to you too.
Thank you.
Regulation of the gambling industry is quite new in Sweden, right?
Yes, since the beginning of the year. And you asked about the communication and the collaboration between the authority and the business then. And the industry this far has been asking for more collaboration, more dialogue, which is an area where we can approve, but still until to a certain limit. But we're trying to talk more to the industry. We meet with the industry, and we're planning to do more meeting with the industry. But since the Swedish way and the Swedish legislation is not, it's vague in some areas, but we can't guide in details to the industry. So what we said back to the industry is, that's another part of the collaboration, that the industry shall collaborate more within themselves in order to understand the legislation and then agree upon, okay, what does this mean? And if they're uncertain, if it's across the border of the legislation, then take a step back to be safe in order to follow the legislation, which also Sarah here before lunch said that's number one, building trust to comply with the legislation. And this far in Sweden, it's been so and so.
So what have you focused on the first almost 10 months?
If it's not dialogue, you mean?
Yes, of course.
We've been focusing on, this has been a very fast re-regulation, so we've been focusing on giving the licenses, and these first months in the new, we've been trying to also ourselves to understand the legislation, and also to all these all the things we observe, all the things we get tips in that the companies are not complying to the law. We need to understand and also take action, and we have taken a few actions and also given fines to the companies that are not complying. And also then there's the part of the companies that are not within the system. We also need to work with that, with the channelizations part, the illegal gambling companies, to keep them out of the legislation. And for example, the collaboration that we're asking for within the industry, then the duty of care, for example, would be an excellent area where they would gather to understand it and then act in the same way in order to comply.
Richard, as I hear you say, you have a very open dialogue with the industry in Denmark. Why do you think that it's important?
Well, most of all, it's important to make and create good rules that people can comprehend and that are easy to follow and that gets us to the point, that get us to where we want them to go. as was said here, we only set the bare minimums of what they have to comply with, and it's up to the industry to take it a point further than that. And that's why we go into dialogue with them, so we know where they think the bare minimums are.
So that is where we are right now. And then I want to ask you, what are your expectations for the industry in the coming 5 years? What do you think will be the most important development?
Well, as Sarah pointed out earlier today, the purpose, creating the purpose and trying to come across to the public and forming a public opinion of this industry. Right now, the public's opinion is changing fast. It's getting more and more time and coverage in the media. So gambling is out there. It's developing fast. It's a fast-changing market, and the public is forming an opinion on this subject that we haven't seen before.
These fast changes you also touched a little bit earlier here, Clement. What do you see as the most important development for the 5 next years for this industry?
Of course, for us as a regulator, we want to enforce the collaboration with with the operators, and probably because we know that on the marketing and commercial point of view, they will use probably more IA or new technologies to have a better knowledge of their customers, and we would, I think, make a lot of efforts. They use this technology also to help players and to improve detection of fraud, detection of money laundering, and also against addiction. Those tools can be designed to sell more, but they also can be designed to sell better. So that's probably will be the next perspective.
What do you think, Jannica?
What I would like to see is, I mean, this is one of the most creative industries that we have. I mean, Professor Griffiths showed us those adverts, and they are very creative and very witty. What I want to see is that creativity being poured into responsible gaming campaigns entirely devoted towards making gambling sustainable. In that respect, I mean, the truth is that a sustainable gambling service is one which provides fruit in the long run for the operator itself, because it is a sustainable business model to keep a player and not have him burn out and self-exclude. So if you can keep an eye on that player and be with him throughout his entire relationship, then that is something from which an operator would benefit, from which the whole state would benefit, the regulator would benefit, the player and everyone he's surrounded with would benefit. So I think that throughout the next 5 years, as my colleague has perfectly said, to see that technology being poured into making gambling more sustainable and more responsible, and also to see this creativity and to make it fun. I mean, so many times we see these adverts are so witty and they're so funny, and then you see you can barely read it, like something like keep gambling fun, or when the fun stops. It's all nice, but it's so small. And the actual advert is much funnier than that one sentence. It's not capturing enough, and we want to see that to make the actual campaign interesting, to make sustainable gambling interesting, to keep it as a form of entertainment. Your adverts should be as entertaining as advertising the service itself.
Sustainable gambling in the next 5 years. Do you agree, Anders?
Yes, I do, and I think there were a lot of good keywords in the speech that Henrik also held in his in the morning, talking about trust and transparency, and that is the core that the business, I think, need to work with in order to work with this broader sustainability topic. They need to really start being really honest about the responsible gaming part. This is how it looks, this is the problems we're dealing with, and then show how they are dealing with it.
So that's transparency.
Yeah, that's totally transparency, exactly. And then the other sustainability things that they are doing, which we saw an example of here, will be easier also to communicate, of course, if they started with a thing that the public out there expect from the gambling companies to deal with the core issue.
Then I would like to know this transparency. Can you, as regulators, help this transparency grow?
Yes.
Thank you.
I think we can do more in terms of, I would admit that we should be doing more in terms of what our operators are doing and showing off what our operators are doing in that respect. I mean, the truth is that this is one of the most regulated industries, and it has the most rigorous compliance requirements, and we understand that. And I think it would help everyone if we give our operators a platform to actually showcase what they're doing. But of course, operators need to be doing it. So we need to work in tandem and we need to work together. Operators need to do more and we need to promote what they're doing more, in my opinion.
I think also as a regulator, we will need to show that our operators who applied and obtained a license are more safer than illegal offer, and that as a players they will be more protected, and they will take benefits by going on the legal offer. And I think the perception is at this stage too weak in France between the illegal and the legal offer, and from the customer perspective. So I think we will need to make efforts to show that it's better to play on the licenses.
So how will you ensure that the users, the customers, stay in the licensed market?
We cannot be sure, of course.
But what can you do?
But what we can do is that we can promote, of course, the fact that if they want to play, they have to play on the licensed operator, and we still need to fight against the illegal offer by blocking IPs and by blocking the address of the illegal offer. But this is a long way, because when you play online, usually you don't even know if you're playing on a licensed operator or not, and it's very easy to find the illegal offer. So we also need to work with the internet industry to work on that. Yes.
Any contribution?
Well, for the channelization that we were talking about, there's also, of course, an area for collaboration between the authority and the licensees in order to, in different way, for example, put pressure on those providing games and payment solutions to operators without license.
Thank you. Any questions from the room?
It's a question more or less for all of you guys. You are from 4 EU countries. You are supervising and regulating 4 different licenses. We have a whole lot of other licenses in other countries. EGBA has been speaking about a one digital market. If you combine that with football, as we've been speaking about earlier today, you have one set of rules and you have different federations making sure those rules are being held. Is it possible in the foreseen future to have one common European gaming law which each country's lottery administration can supervise? I guess a lot of our operators here today have more or less more lawyers working in the company than other employees, to combine with all the laws in the different countries. So would it be possible to have one European gaming law?
Good question. Let's begin with Anders.
I can't answer. Sorry. No, I can't start to speculate, actually. Partly because I'm not a lawyer. Just the communicator. So I'll pass it on.
Ouch. Possible, perhaps, likely. I don't think so at this stage, to be honest. Not because it's... I don't know. I mean, the truth is everyone knows that gambling was taken off the Commission's agenda just last year or the year before. So I don't see it as something which is very likely. We really wish it would be the case. As you probably know, that in Malta you can operate with any license acquired from any EU state. So obviously we are big proponents of that. But otherwise, it's probably not so likely. But what is likely and what is happening is increased collaboration between the regulators. And that is something that is on us, frankly, on every regulator to work towards. We do meet, we do share best practices, and in that respect, that should benefit the entire industry as a whole.
I agree, and I am not a lawyer too, but what I learned from the European Court of Justice is that they accept that we have different rules in every country, and we are also collaborating with other regulators to try to share the best practices and make it easier for the operators in terms of standards. And we also have the normalization process holding about reporting data. That will probably issue a normalized list of data next year. So I think we try to improve to make it easier for European operators, but I don't believe that we will have recognition of licenses in Malta or in Denmark, in France, and even if we try to share the best standards.
But how good is your collaboration, speaking about collaboration, across borders?
We are part of a group of regulators,
yes.
Such as the GREF, also, so we are exchanging at these events like 1 or 2 times a year, and then we have bilateral collaboration between regulators to exchange data, to exchange also the way we have to face the fight against fraud, etc. For instance, we had an issue in France regarding a specific problem, the development of tipsters, people that are selling online tips about sports, and they sell the fact that with paying them you will win a lot of money online, and so we shared this information with all the regulators. We have an agreement with to see if they have the same problem in their country, how does it comply with the consumption code, and so this is kind of exchange we have day by day.
Yes. I'm not a lawyer either, but I think that the answer was no. Other questions?
I can just add to the collaboration between the authorities that we have begun with a closer collaboration with the Malta authority because it's so connected, of course, with the gambling business. Many companies applying for a license in Sweden already have a Malta license. So it's, for many reasons, good to have a closer collaboration.
Thank you.
Okay, when I was a kid, or especially when I was a teenage girl, my parents tried to force me into their set of rules. They called it education or general upbringing. But I found a way, if I wanted to go out, I jumped the window. Today, in a world where most people, or at least especially in the northern part of Europe, everybody's level of English is extremely well. Do you think it's possible to force the local local laws upon people, or won't they just, like me, find a solution, go to a .com and play with an unlicensed operator? Because industry rumors is that the numbers in Sweden for unlicensed gambling is going up. So is that the way to go forward, or what is your take on all this?
I think the purpose of our regulation is not to have 100% of the players that are playing unlicensed operator. We know that it's impossible because everybody will go through the window, as you say. But the fact is that if you are a new player, you just have to find a legal offer that is attractive enough to make you entertaining and to make you happy, actually. And we won't block the illegal offer forever. So we know that it's impossible. The fact is that we just want to channelize as much as possible, and especially the recreational players, and because they just need to know that there is a legal offer, and that it is attractive enough to respond to their demand. That's the main purpose of the regulation, and by protecting them, it's another argument by saying to them that if they want to play, they have to play on this legal offer. Of course, we know that in France a lot of players are using VPN but those players, we cannot do anything for them if they want to. It's their choice, and we are not condemning those players that are playing on VPN, but they cannot contact us after that saying, I cannot withdraw my money from this operator. If it's not licensed, we cannot do anything for you. So it's kind of a balance between protection and the fact that they can play on everything on the .com.
But is it realistic to close all windows?
No, but we need to have the home good enough so they want to spend money in this home.
Do you want to add something, Richard?
Yes, we believe that it's about what you offer the people, what you offer the public. If the local laws are good enough and attractive enough that the people know that if I play with this company under this license, well, I get fair games, I get transparent games, and I get an opportunity to self-exclude, etc. So if you offer good enough local law, then channeling shouldn't be a problem, or less of a problem.
And who have the responsibility for that?
Yeah, to create the laws. But that's why we need the dialogue with the industry.
The Danish way.
The Danish way, exactly.
Maybe I'm also extremely biased here, being Danish and everything, and well.
Other questions?
Thank you. Hi. I'm not specialized in compliance and stuff like that, but I do work in that area in data, so I do have a bit of a view on that. And from my understanding, I feel like, as you were saying, like the industry was going super fast. And I feel like in a lot of countries, it went a bit too fast. You were expecting gambling operators to be more responsible. They were not. And just like parents who would leave kids do whatever they want and then they realize that they burned down the playground, you come up with very strict rules that are not even strict enough in your opinion. You think we could even go an extra mile on top of that. You mentioned that, for example, that you set up the minimum rules and you expect people to go further. And also the position is a binary position. Either you are good or you're bad. You comply or you don't comply. So by then people, they will only, because it's a business, so by then they need to make money. They need to make as much money as they can. So they will minimize the losses and the impact, negative impact, to become compliant, just in order to be compliant. But what if you had an approach that would be more kind of a ranking thing? So let's say, for example, so because there is nothing to push people to go the extra mile, right? To go deeper than that. It's just yes, no. What if you rank people by 1, 2, 3, 4, and let's say that the 1 can have, like, I don't know, 20 hours of advertising a month, but a 4 would have 0. Instead of saying, like, no one can advertise gambling anymore from that day. Or maybe in terms of taxation or whatever. I believe that such approach might be better and healthier for the industry, but I don't know what all your opinion on that.
Do you see possibilities in that suggestion?
Okay, I'm going to take it. What I can say is from my it's a very interesting suggestion. from what we do as a Maltese regulator, we have that ranking, but it's internal and it's a risk-based approach in terms of what we do with our compliance audits, for example. So depending on where you are ranked internally, which is only something that we would know, you would get a different amount of compliance audits. So you can have one every year or you can have one every 3 years, for example. And that is how we change, how we approach that from that perspective. And it's for a variety of reasons. It's mostly to direct resources as to what we believe poses a higher risk to the consumer, to the regulator, and to the state. So in that respect, we are taking that on board. Otherwise, obviously, we've never banned gambling advertising in that respect. So, and we've always had a free market approach. But that's what I meant with operators probably need to go a step further, because the second that marketing becomes so aggressive, you would find states like what happened last year or the year before, where gambling advertising was banned completely. And that's exactly what we don't want to see, because we believe that that goes completely contrary to the objective of channelization. In my opinion, that banning advertising does nothing for channelization. And you need to show what the good places to gamble are and what the safe places are, what the regulated places are. So that's my opinion.
We studied last year the possibility to rank the operators, especially regarding responsible gambling strategy. But we had to face a lot of legal problems about that, because it's kind of a name and shame strategy, and it's pretty hard to put in place because it will be contested by all the operators except for the first one. We decided, we have internally this ranking actually, and we decided to reinforce the control we operate on the operators of the bad ranked operators. But it's more a question about try to improve them and try to, so they can reach the best operator to have higher standards. But it's for the public to have access to this kind of ranking, it raises too much problems.
And then one last question before the coffee break. In the future, a short comment from each one of you. In the future, do you see the gambling industry being more self-regulated or regulated by regulators? Richard, you can begin.
I believe they'll try to self-regulate more, to differentiate themselves from each other. It's simple as that. They have to make their own mark and make what do we as an industry bring to the table to the public. What can we do? Why do you have to play at us and not at them? So I think self-regulation will be a theme we see in the future, yeah.
Thank you. Come on.
I think we are in a way to a better safe regulation. I am just afraid of the fact that it would be too late. And
why? Sorry, now I make this answer a little bit longer, but why?
Because usually when they take into account the fact that they have been way too far in advertising, for instance, then the politicians also will react probably before the industry. And my wish is that the industry will react before. But with a very strong competition, it's pretty hard, because, as I said, you need to be very courageous to be the first one to move and to step back. So I wish it will happen, but I hope it will happen. But probably I won't bet on it.
Jannica?
I would agree that self-regulation is probably the way forward, but it also doesn't mean that legislators should just take a step back and wait for self-regulation, because legislators, as it was said before, are always 3 steps behind, and that's true, but maybe we should at least try to be 2 steps behind and try to step up our own game, and we probably can get that with more dialogue with the industry. If the industry has sat down around the table to self-regulate, then we should be there too. The legislator should be there too. The legislator can learn so much from the industry. It is the industry that has all the knowledge and all the data. So if we work together, we can actually probably achieve a product that is much better than the industry working by itself or the legislator working by itself.
And Anders, what do you think?
Yes, very unexciting. I also agree. I think that I agree with these, that the self-regulation is, for the business, it's good to work with the self-regulation for the reputation and work in the sustainable way which all this conference is about, and not be involved in court cases, which take resources from the business, from the society, and for the reputation. So that's probably, we will see more of that.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. And thank you. Now we will stretch our legs and have some coffee, and then I will see you again at 3:15.